Hello and welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. My name is Shamel Jordan. I am your host. Genealogy Quick Start is available on YouTube and Facebook, and of course, Philly Cam, which is our studio home. How are you doing today? It is so nice to have you here. Of course, every time we get together, we have new quick starts, and today is no different. We have, of course, Jim and Michael come up with some really interesting things. Proper identification, please. We know how important identification is in this day and world, this post 9/11 world. I haven't said that in a long time. But yes, identification is very important for us as genealogists as well for our ancestors. So, Jim and Michael are going to talk about how to properly identify your ancestors. We're not letting ancestry tell us who they are, we're going to properly identify them. Also, oh my goodness, have you ever met someone and you're like, we are going to have fun together? I know I just met you 30 seconds ago, but I know that you and we're going to have fun together. That is our special guest, Guy Weston. He is also, he's from Jersey as well, and he is doing amazing research. And he is going to share that story with you today in claiming the property of an early Black landowner in Timbuktu. So, you know what to do out there. We love to know where you are. And if you are a member of a genealogy group, hey, there might be some genealogy souls out there that need saving. So share and represent your genealogy group as well. Please put those into the chat. So without further ado, I want to bring out, my regulars, the number one quick starters in the land. And first up, columnist and editor, James M. Beidler. Oh, there you are. How are you, Jim? Thank you
I
for
am great,
being
Shamel.
here. All right, next up is genealogy tip of the day. Featured speaker, 100K, followed by 100,000 people in around the world. How are you, Michael?
I'm not too bad. How are you, Shamel?
I'm doing good. I don't know if people realize that, Michael, you do trips and that they can actually come and hang out with you. Now, we don't want you to tell us what the next trip is, but how do they find out about, you go to Salt Lake City, you go to all the Disneylands of genealogy, you go to Fort Wayne. Do you go to DC?
Not yet. There's just too many Mickey Mouses around DC. We have a hard time. Um, you can go to the website genealogytipoftheday.com and there'll be information about
Yeah.
those there.
Yes, because it's
So
all about that hands-on. I really think that's the coolest thing in the
we have
world.
we have a good time. We do minimal outside activities because you're there to look for dead people, not overly socialized.
Oh, you mean you don't take them so they can get the big blue cup that's refillable somewhere?
They're on their own for all that. They're on their own for all that stuff. Yeah.
All right. So, guys, I don't know if you saw the question. Did you see the question of the day about maybe not? It sounds like you did it. So, our special guest, right? One of the things that he expressed about, the quick start that he's going to share with us is he didn't learn while he was in high school or in school the history of African American landowners. Did you guys, were there some of those things for you, like when you grew up and you're doing genealogy and you're like, hey, why didn't we learn that in school?
Oh, loads of things. I mean, I think probably me being born and raised in Pennsylvania Dutch land, and all of our German ancestry. I It was drilled into us. Well, they came for religious reasons. Because they had to follow the religion of their ruler in the German states in Europe, and here they could be free to follow whatever faith that they wanted to. Well, when I started doing research and reading about reality, I realized that was a big eh. that really it was a whole lot less romantic than wanting to worship freely. They came for the land. So.
And the money, it's always about the money.
Follow the money. Follow the money. Exactly.
Wow. How about you, Michael? Any revelations in adulthood?
I don't know if it was a revelation, but I remember as a college freshman, I took American history pre-Civil War, whatever it was, and the instructor's making a big deal about how in Virginia they used to pay their taxes and use tobacco as currency. And I thought, well, no kidding. I mean, he really thought he was going to surprise us by this revelation. And if you've got any Virginia ancestors that were there before the Revolution, and you've done any research at all, you know tobacco was used as a currency. So he thought he was surprising us, but it was everybody else. But it was to a genealogist with people there, it was not a news flash.
Let's face it, you're much smarter than the average bear, Michael. So.
Well, I don't go trashing through cars for stuff either. So.
Those bears are pretty crafty. I cannot believe how they can open car doors and everything.
They problem solve, which is what genealogists should do sometimes,
Oh, nice little dig there. Let's see who we have here. We have some genealogists out here. Who's number one? Oh, Gary Franklin has claimed the top spot again. Hello, Gary Franklin. Thanks for being here from Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Paula from West Deptford. Paula was our number one girl for so long. Paula, well, you're always number one in my heart, Paula. So nice to see your name here. Oh, and Judy, look at our top three. These guys are like always here. Judy, it is so nice to have you from Chicagoland. Effingham. I like Effingham. I'm going to use that in something. Effingham Genealogical and Historical Society.
Watch it.
Where in Effingham are you from? Hello, Benita Gibbs from Oriental, North Carolina. Where is Oriental? I don't know that. Gary, yes. Okay, Gary is a genealogy junkie, of course. He's OGS. He's AAGS in Cleveland. That's Dr. Debbie's group. He's AAGHS Chicago, who is the number one newsletter opener of Genealogy Quick Start newsletter. And who's underneath? She's responsible for them being the number one opener. Hello, Angela Allen. I do miss you down in Houston by way of Chicagoland. Hey, Katie, how are you from Philly repping HSP? I took a nap and I swear I had a dream that I was at HSP. Weirdness. Okay. But I need to come there, it looks like. Benita is OGS. Yes, put in your group, Benita. We have Tallahassee African American Genealogical Society. Hello. That is where my roots are. Nice to have you here. Hey, Jean, we have the second genealogy junkie in the group. We have Jean, who is Collegeville, AATG in Philly, OGS, Family Quest in Philly, OGS, Greater Virginia. I think you put in new ones every week. Are you joining new groups? South Carolina Historical Society, Sumter County Genealogical Society. Okay, save some groups from other people, Jean. Michelle Grant from Omaha. Thanks for, oh my goodness, it's Emma Davis. Emma Davis, it is so nice to have you here from Emily Davis, sorry, from Pittsburgh. We are Alabama researchers together. Hey, A. Armstrong from Decatur, Georgia. I wonder how you know about the show there in Decatur. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. So let's go ahead and get started with our new quick start, which is proper identification, please. So this isn't like what happened to me at Boston Logan when they wouldn't let me get on the plane because my driver's license and my ticket had one letter difference. Like, this isn't that kind of proper identification.
It is so not like that. Yeah, because this the era we're dealing, the era today where spelling matters, and if you don't have a middle initial on one document and there is on another, or the middle name spelled out on one and it's an initial on the other, or whatever, that the whole world blows up. No, none of that. And in a way, that's what led to this quick start, is the fact that spellings and such, and even dates, more so in some cultures than others, are very, very loosey goosey. Well, Michael's got some really good examples that we're going to explore during the steps. I'll give you, just as a little preface, the one that brought this to my mind was pretty early in my genealogical journey, sometime in the 1980s. Don't do the math on that, folks.
Genealogy baby, you were.
Yeah, I was.
That has a division by zero error. Go ahead.
so I had most of my lines were Berks County, Pennsylvania. I had one in the adjoining county of Lebanon, and of course it divides off, and the Rupp line. I'm working at Lebanon County Historical, and looking in the vertical files where they have the remnants from previous research done for people who wrote in. Well, here's the whole chart from the Rupp that I'm looking at. The Rupp to the Heilmans, to the Zegrists, to the Reicherts. I'm like, well, this genealogy is pretty easy here, isn't it? So, and I made some attempts to look up some records, but I didn't do it real diligently for a while. And then when I do, in this Heilman line, I find what appears to be my Heilman daughter, Anna Katerina Heilman daughter, as the in the will of a completely different Heilman father. And I'm like, what is going on here? So then I go back to the source data, and what I find is that the one that the folks doing the research at the Historical Society had put in there, I think it was September 2nd, 1760, that mine was born. Well, September 3rd, 1760, a cousin of that Anna Katerina, also named Anna Katerina, was born. And so they obviously came upon this one, and it's like, oh, there we are. Let's just continue this line, because one day off, and often you would think one day off is no big deal. Well, it is. It is when there are two cousins born a day apart. They were baptized. One was baptized very soon after. The other wasn't baptized until months later. So in that baptismal book, they weren't adjoining, which is not an excuse.
Right.
You should have. And we'll kind of. I'm going to get ahead of myself here.
Are you doing the whole quick start? Are we on step 5 already?
No.
He's on step 8. But go ahead.
I'm on step -3. Michael, work that out on your number line, will you?
It's just to the left of 0.
But anyway, so because we didn't try to properly identify that person didn't, that at first that I didn't identify them correctly either. So that's my long-winded extended preface there. So.
Yes, but you brought up something that is extremely important in genealogy, and something that we do when we're young in genealogy. We get excited when we see whole trees done, and we just assume them, and you shouldn't do that. And the other thing, this is kind of weird. It might sound weird for me to say this, but when I talk to people, I did not realize that they believe that ancestry, a hint, they're saying this is a fact. And so realize that a hint is just that. They are not saying this is your family. They're saying, hey, this
Check
looks
it
like
out.
it might be. So check it out. Yes.
They should call them ancestry dreams and use little clouds instead of leaves. But that's another story there.
All right, let's get started with this quick start. Step 1 for proper identification, please, is of course to pick an ancestor. So we are focusing in on just one person at a time here. Love that.
And I would say this is even more necessary for ancestors that you don't have home sources for. And what I mean by home sources are if in the attic you have an ancestor's birth or baptismal certificate, their marriage license, their death certificate, those just being in your house gives them some provenance, gives them some credence that they belong to the right person. So those and any of you that haven't taken that trip to the attic as first thing, yeah, you better go do that, and see what gems are awaiting you. But for many cases, you won't have any home sources, and so you're having to track down these certificates, and then it becomes a little more dicey. Do they all relate to the same person?
Exactly. So we picked that ancestor, we're focusing in, and step 2 is to examine identification. So what are we doing in this step?
You're trying to make certain that those different records, all as close as they can, indicate and reference the same individual. Nothing is going to be consistent. There's always going to be inconsistencies. And as Jim alluded to, some ethnic groups and backgrounds tend to be more consistent with ages and whatnot than do others, just for a variety of reasons. But they should be relatively consistent. I would also always keep in mind to be open to the possibility there are more than 2 dudes or dudettes that have the same or a very similar name in the same location. Now, there are many times where there are not, but you want to think, could this be a first cousin, my ancestor and his first cousin living in a very close area to each other with the same first and last name? Just, something to think about.
To play devil's advocate, if for nothing else. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So my cousin Floyd said that he was looking for his great grandmom, I believe, and he found a Lucy and a Henry. So he's like, got him, ding, There was another Lucy and Henry, mother, daughter, saying two. It's not like it was Smith or Johnson. It was Toomer, but it was in the same location. So double check. I love the step 2 examination.
Yeah, and don't jump to conclusions, because I've got a John and Francisca Trotvetter, and in the same little area, there's a John and Francisca Turnhofer. And if you're not paying, I mean, they're not related at all. It's not like they're cousins or whatnot, but the names are kind of similar. And sometimes people say, well, I listened to somebody say spelling can be different and I don't even think. So and then you got to be careful with that. You don't want to go too crazy with variance in spellings. Because in this case, the Turnhoffers and the Trotvetters, first names are the same for husband and wife. They're totally different couples.
And it could, just because they have the same surname does not mean that they're related. And the way that stuck in my head was Megan Smolniak, right? When she told me that her and her husband were not related, like they traced back DNA, same little village. So of course people are like, of course. And they're like, no, they all did the same thing in that village or some blacksmithing or something.
Well, it turned out he really wasn't a Smolniak.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. I forgot that little twist there. Yep. So look at that name. You would think, oh, you definitely are related. All right. So examine identification. Don't make any assumptions. Step 3 is to try to break the ID. What's that mean? I love this idea.
Well, you should not assume, like we've been talking about, that you've had the bingo moment just because you find one record. Like in my case of those 2 Anna Catarinas, they should have checked, because it was in the same baptismal book, same congregation. So they should have just looked for all the 1760 entries might be spread over a couple of pages. Well, do that, and then find, ooh, here's another Anna Katerina Hauman. Ding, ding, ding. That sort of thing. To try to flesh out more information and make sure all the information is consistent within kind of a margin for error.
This is the devil advocate step.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that's step 3. Step 4 is to do a chronology. Is this like a timeline?
You got it. And here I had a situation in my family, Daub family, DAUB. I know I've used them as examples ad nauseum, and there were baptisms of a father, Peter Daub, and his mother, and then his wife, Magdalena, for how many years? 50, I think it was 50, total of 50 years. Well, they ain't going to be to the same Peter and Magdalena, but where's the teeter-totter point that, because the older ones were an older set of Peter and Magdalena as parents, and the very ones at the end are the younger pair of Peter and Magdalenas. But what about in between? And I did end up solving it by putting it all together on a chronology, where they were at, other facts about them, and was able to find the split between the two.
Michael looks like he's skeptical about your
there's another possibility that it was all the same Peter and just two different Magdalenas.
True.
That's, you want to keep that. I'm not saying that happened in your case, but that, because sometimes they will get really creative and have two wives with the same first name.
Sure, or more. Yeah.
And that can be a red flag. Her having children for that many years is a huge red flag. Him, it's not such a red.
It's at least possible. No, I absolutely. And I'm trying to remember. Did I have a death of? No, I didn't have a. Did I have a death of the first? I don't know. There was some reason I was able to successfully eliminate that as a possibility.
Right, but aside from being snarky about your situation, the chronology helps you to see. It helps you to see gaps and inconsistencies and those kinds of things that you might not see when you've organized the information in a different way.
Right.
Yes, this can't all sit in the ancestry tree and all magically come together. So step 5, and we're going to show some of these documents, is to wash, rinse, repeat with another ancestor. I love that. Let's take a look at some of these documents you have.
One of the things I'll say while Shamel's pulling that up, many times one of the best ways to get these same name people sorted out, or whatever you want to call them, is to research for every stinking piece of paper or document you can find on the person or both those people, because the more documents you have from as many sources as possible, the better the chance you can sift them out. Sometimes it can still be a hot mess.
Yes.
But you really want to start with that as the best way to do that. This comes from a court case in 1799. This was an agreement between a widow and her children and her sons-in-law about her husband's estate. And one of the this is a Rucker being settled there, but there's a James Tinsley who married one of these Ruckers, and he's my dude. And the problem is, this James Tinsley had a first cousin who, surprise, surprise, was also named James Tinsley. And they're born just about the same time. They're living in the same area of Virginia, and separating them out, because one went to Kentucky and that was my dude. One stayed in Virginia and it's not my dude. And in this part of the document, there's the agreement that's signed, and then all these heirs are signing it, except, I should have made it in red, John Tinsley is signing for his son who intermarried with Susanna Rucker. So right there in that document, I got lucky. This is why you want to look at everything, because there's not so much luck as just perseverance like crazy. But so I knew that the Susanna Rucker's James Tinsley was the child of John from this document. And I also wonder, because genealogists always want to be wondering, why didn't James sign that document? What was the reason why he didn't sign it? And it doesn't say that here. Most likely he either wasn't in the area or he was ill. Well, the James in question lived 30 more years. So if he was ill, he wasn't deathly ill.
Okay.
There'll be another document that kind of talks about that a little bit. But this is just the signatures of this. So John is signing it for his son James, so just to make that really clear a little bit. So this was cool because I got John Tinsley signing this document, and again, this is from that 1799 agreement, and then this was from a court case. The agreement probably wouldn't have been retained, except there was court action over the agreement a few years later, because they were trying to settle the estate without going through probate. And that doesn't always go well when you've got this many heirs. All it takes is one or two to have an issue. And I think we've got one more document. I thought there was one more. Yeah. This is from a different case. This is from a different court case, but it also references James. And in the bottom, it's kind of hard to read. This is James Sled versus John Sled from 1830. And it's a summons. And we often don't think of a summons as having, significant genealogy clues there. But at the bottom, it's kind of hard to read, but it names several people being sued: Elizabeth West, John Harrison, Sally Sled, and then another one, who are not inhabitants of this state. So they're in that sum, and then it says on the side there's a Tinsley there that it was served on. It tells me that at this point in time, those individuals were not living in Virginia. So I can, again, it's just a clue to help me sift out identities like we mentioned earlier. These individuals were the ones that were not in Virginia on January 30th of 1830. But going through as many documents as you can helps you to build that chronology with even more detail. And the more detail you have, the better the chance you can separate the individuals out. There may still be the occasional record. I've got a couple that says James Tinsley on it, and I don't know if it's James, son of John, or James, son of the other dude. But at least I know the James that married the Rucker and went to Kentucky was son of John, because the court documents make that very, very clear. But you got to just research as much as you can. It's kind of like Jim's example with Anna Herman Ding Ding Ding. I think I did. Was that part of the last name, that Ding Ding Ding? But he mentioned that individual, and there were, when you go through more records than just the one, you see the more information you have, the better equipped you are to ding ding ding, get that answer to your question.
And the other thing about that happens in real life, but it happens exponentially on these ancestry trees, is that when you grab the wrong document for the person, you're going to keep getting more wrong documents for the same wrong person. And so it just kind of grows and mushrooms.
Yeah, that's why without giving a whole speech on the hints, you've got to be very careful using the dreams.
And you don't have to. There's a I don't know yet. You don't have to do yes or no. Just kind of let it sit there if you don't know.
And you can not even use the hints.
Yeah. What did you just say? Don't use the hints?
Yeah. It's like, sometimes we ignore people that give us good advice. Apply that to ancestry as well.
In reverse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. Kathy says that her 2 times great uncle married 2 Carolines. Oh my gosh. Fun trying to separate the 12 children. Holy crap. You're a better woman than me, Kathy.
Yeah. My ancestor and his brother both married women that had the exact same first and last name. They were actually cousins. And it was very confusing, because then there's these 2 women that had the same first name and last name, because they married brothers. And the one went by a nickname, and she had to, in her pension application, document why she didn't use her birth name. And there's a mention in there, my sister-in-law had this name, and since I was the second one, there was already a Nancy, so I used Lizzie instead. after the
Very
marriage.
cool. See, she was looking out for future generations. I dig her. All right, guys, that was a fabulous quick start. The same name thing is perpetually a challenge, but let's look at those steps again because, this is how we get better. So, for proper identification, please, step one, pick an ancestor. Step two, examine the identification. Step three, play the devil's advocate. Try to break the identification. Step four, do a chronology. Step five, wash, rinse, and repeat with another ancestor. So, Jim and Michael, thank you so much for that quick start. I'm going to apply that to my craziness that's going on in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. All right, we will see you guys later.
Later.
Okay, 1 second to get ready for our special guest. Hello and welcome to our second quick start. I'm so excited to share this one with you. One thing that we have all over America and definitely in New Jersey are Black enclaves. And those are, not necessarily municipalities, but they are home to a lot of African Americans. And so today I want to introduce you to, he has so many titles. He gave me two that don't even tell all of them, but I'll make him bring some of those out so you can know who he is. His name is Guy Weston. How are you today, Guy?
I'm doing quite fine, and I'm very happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you, Guy. I know you're probably like, who is this strange woman who is constantly telling me, come home, come home? But Guy, I don't know who you are, but I have you had your reputation precedes you, and I have been looking forward to hanging out with you for a while. But Guy, tell us maybe, what is so important to you about genealogy? Like, I can't ask you like how you got started because that's part of your quick start, but what really excites you about genealogy?
What excites me about genealogy is connecting to ancestors from my past and having documents like the ones behind me that really drive home the information you might find in a narrative. For example, on my left, is that my left? There's a gravestone of an ancestor who was born on May 15th, 1815, and died on April 19th, 1875. I didn't know that gravestone was there. I drove by that place for many years, not knowing that my family history was in that cemetery. So it's one thing to find his name in an archive or in a document on ancestry.com, but to find his gravestone was really something that motivated me, because you can then begin to know things you wouldn't know otherwise about a person when you know where they lived and where they died and what those dates are.
I had that exact same pleasure when I went down to Alabama and I got to walk the cemetery. And like you said, yeah, it's one thing seeing them in the census records and the marriage, death records. But when you go to the place where people came to say goodbye to them.
Yes,
that's a pretty interesting spot. So without further ado, Guy, because I can talk to you all day. But first, I just want to make sure that we highlight that you are, in addition to being a family historian and a cultural heritage specialist, you are also the editor of the Journal of the African American Historical and Genealogical Society. And you are you a president of one of the groups?
Washington, D.C., yes.
Yeah, so you're
hopefully not for long, just until the end of this year.
Oh, okay. That's nice. You have successors. Usually, that comes with a ball and chain. I'm not being, right. That's not all, just all groups. Once you become president, they never let you go.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I was very pleased to hear the name Gary Franklin in the audience, because Gary is somebody that I attend meetings with every month, but we've never met. So hi, Gary. It's nice to see you in another forum.
Gary is the man. You gotta come hang out on the circuit with Gary. Gary's
Yes, indeed.
everywhere, except for
Yes,
New
indeed.
Jersey. I haven't seen Gary in New Jersey, but he's in Ohio. You go to Ohio, Gary's everywhere. All right, let's get started with this wonderful quick start called Claiming the Property of an Early Black Landowner in Timbuktu. So first tell us where is Timbuktu?
Well, Timbuktu is an antebellum free Black community. And I guess I don't have to explain what antebellum means for an audience like this, but very often we use words and we have to explain what they mean. But this is a Black community in southern New Jersey that was founded by formerly enslaved and free Black people in the 1820s. It is not the only such community. By 1860, there were 24 such communities in the southern half of the state. One thing that people don't realize, because we don't learn in school, is that all of the northern states had passed manumission laws by 1804. New Jersey was actually the last state to do that. Vermont was the first state to do that in 1777. Most of them were gradual manumission laws, which meant that slavery was abolished over time. But the point is, those actions were taken decades before the Civil War. And in those places, there's a lot of African American history and documentation of African American genealogy that we aren't familiar with. And so one of our missions in life, of course, is to make these things known as broadly as possible.
Absolutely, Guy. Very well said. So let's get started with this quick start. For step one, for claiming the property of an early Black landowner in Timbuktu, step one for Guy was to obtain the deed. So tell us why you were obtaining this deed, Guy.
Well, my grandmother actually had a first cousin who was the keeper of our family property. And one day she told my mother and me to come to her house because she was going to give us the deeds to the family property. What we didn't realize, what we expected, was that we would get contemporary typewritten legal documents that would be very clear and easy to read. What we got was probably 25 pages like the document right behind my head that were handwritten: an 1829 deed, an 1831 deed, an 1842 will, an 1845 indenture of mortgage, tax receipts, and mortgage receipts for several decades after that, all of which contained names.
So wait, Guy, were you a genealogist at this point and you just
Absolutely
passed out
not.
For a second and you
No.
woke up?
Well, it's funny. I passed out, but I didn't realize the significance of it until many years later, because how many people do you know from any background that have those types of original documents? I happen to come from a family of pack rats. A good genealogist is a pack rat. You can be organized. You don't have to be a messy pack rat, but you can be a person that keeps everything and keeps it organized. And I come from generations of people like that, because otherwise you wouldn't have had a woman in the 1980s who had documents from her ancestors 150 years before that, nor would you have me with those documents in my possession 50 years after she gave them to us. And they're still in that very excellent condition.
Unbelievable. You are so blessed. And so, okay, so you got the deed. So step two, for claiming, is you had to do research to find the heirs. So we're used to researching dead people. How did you research the heirs? Like, that's forensic. That's a whole other thing.
Absolutely. Let me first explain that I was so excited because my mother said she would give me this piece of property to build a house. And so having 1.5 acres of ground to build a house, that's like having a down payment in today's dollars of tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more than $100,000, such that you could build a house with literally $0 because you have this land. So I went to the title company and presented the deed. He said, well, you don't own this property. He said, what do you mean you don't own this property? Well, it turned out that my fourth great-grandfather purchased the property in 1829, but when he died, his son took the property, his daughter and son-in-law, and his wife took the property. When that generation died, they passed it to the next generation, always the same piece of paper. So in each generation, there were other potential heirs that should have had a chance to have a claim. So in my case, my great-grandfather was the one who ended up having the property, which is why I got it. but he had 5 brothers and sisters. And so I had to find the descendants of those 5 brothers and sisters and ask them to speak now or forever hold their peace with regard to any claims on the property. Fortunately, and these are people born before the Civil War. I think the oldest one was born in 1852, and the youngest one was born in the first decades or the first years of the 20th century. But fortunately, most people don't know the names of their ancestors from that far back.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't really, I found out their names in census records, but what I had to do was just to say for the descendants of John Giles, Joshua Giles, Emma Giles, and Mary Elizabeth Giles, and one more Giles, I can't remember his name, to speak now and forever hold their peace with regard to any claims. And that was an ad in the Burlington County Times. Fortunately, none of those people responded. I did know one branch of the family, and most of them weren't interested because at the time, the property was worth $20,000. This is 40 years ago. And there were, I don't know, 30 or 40 potential heirs. So each person would get a check for a few $100s. Nobody was interested in fighting me over $300. And so it was a pretty easy process, even though some of those people were upset because they didn't understand why I was suing them for something that they didn't claim to own. But now we're all friends.
But that was a cool way to get to know all these people. So what you're saying here in this step, Guy, is that you did not have to go to name all of the people. You just had to get down far enough to say the descendants of these particular people.
Right. And those were all people whose names were written in 19th century documents that I found in the New Jersey State Archives. So I didn't have to name the people who live today. I had to name their 2 or 3 generations prior grandparents.
Okay, and we have a lot of documents we're going to share with you. We're going to go through these steps first. So you found the heirs. Step 3 was then you served this public notice. This was the speak now or forever hold your peace part, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and that was just basically in the newspaper. So that's a great research source for us when we're researching our ancestors to look for stuff like this.
Absolutely, particularly since newspapers are indexed now. So I actually created a record that somebody else can use later by making that announcement. But so people had 30 days to respond. None of those people responded. And so most of those people were eliminated. But the act of finding their names was what got me interested in genealogy in the first place. And particularly today, this was in the early 1990s. So we didn't have online index records to use. I had to go to the archives and find names. But since then, like in more recent years, I've been able to find people and introduce myself. And we've really had a lot of good relationships that are built as a result of that. Because people, for example, are inspired by the fact that I have these documents behind me that are related to their ancestry and their heritage as well.
Which is super cool.
Absolutely.
So you serve public notice. Step 4 is you remove the heir's property claim. So after a certain time period, they no longer had a claim to the property.
Correct.
And then step 5 is to legalize ownership. So what did you have to do? Go into the courthouse to do that?
Yeah, well, the notification to the heirs that we knew was essentially a lawsuit. And so they had so much time to respond and nobody did. And so a judge issued a decree saying that nobody responded. So therefore the legal owner was my mother, because she was able to prove, I was able to prove through research that she was entitled to 1/5, but these other 4 parts had to be eliminated, and they were eliminated by no one responding to the lawsuit.
Fantastic. And so then you were able to tell the story, which let's share some of these documents now. Amazing documents. So first you have here some people. Who are these people, Guy?
Well, these are my great-grandmother is in the middle on the top, and the other people are mostly her siblings. 2 of them are the children of one of her siblings.
The one on the right-hand side, we just need to put a beard and a mustache on her because that's you.
That's my people have said that, and it's funny because I actually posted this very picture on Facebook recently, and her picture actually, because her birthday was a few weeks ago, and many people said that that's funny. But her sister to her left is to my left actually is who I descend from, and but these are all people that I knew growing up, who told me stories about Timbuktu. I didn't know. It never occurred to me, particularly as a child, it never occurred to me that they had lived there as long as they did. All I knew was that my great grandmother was born there in 1902, and she's one in the middle. I didn't know that was her great grandfather who actually purchased the property, and that people had lived there for 80 years even before she was born. But I was
Wow.
able to connect the stories they told me with the experience of the documents and everything that I learned. So this is the Timbuktu Cemetery, which is only has 13 gravestones, but it has about 100, as many as 164 unmarked graves. And
Oh, wow.
we put what we call interpretive signage in the front to tell the stories of the people who are buried there, particularly for those who don't have marked graves. One thing I point out is that in many Black cemeteries that contain U.S. colored troops, U.S. colored troops got
Headstones.
headstones from the government as a benefit of military service. So those lasted. Common and ordinary people often had wooden grave markers, which didn't last. So the fact that there are predominantly U.S. colored troops only means that they had better stones. It doesn't mean that they're the majority population. They're only about 10% of the people in the cemetery. But on the right, we have a sign that describes them. On the left is a sign that has history of Timbuktu. There's another sign that's not in the picture that tells the story of the Amy Zion Church that founded the cemetery. And then the fourth sign in the middle is a tribute to a couple of the troops who don't have gravestones.
So how do you know about the people? How do you know that there are that many people who don't have headstones? Do you have
We
their
did
names?
we did a geophysical survey. A better term for that is ground penetrating radar,
Oh,
which
I was
gives
going to
you an
ask you about
image, yes, which gives you an image of the area, and it shows how many gravestones or how many grave shafts there are, and then which ones have markers and which ones don't. And so there are 71 or 172 graves, but only 11 gravestones. And then there are records like burial permits, for example, and some of the burial permits. Obviously, I think the significance of that is clear. But even military pension records might say that the soldier is buried there, and so is his wife. But his
Yes.
wife doesn't have a stone. We still know that she's there based on the record that's attached to her husband.
Right. All right.
And this
Fantastic.
is one of those documents that we got from our cousin Lillian, which is the deed that you saw behind me when you
It
saw
had
my
a
face.
survey in it too. Oh my God.
That was what interesting. So you can't really see this really clearly, but the diagonal line on the right is the road, which is still there. And the little square in the middle is the first parcel of property that my fourth great grandfather purchased. And then on the right is just the cover page, and it says deed Samuel Atkinson and wife to John Brewer. John Brewer was my ancestor, and Samuel Atkinson was a Quaker who sold the land to him. The page on the left is actually the first of 3 or 4 pages that describe the entire deed. One more thing I'll say is that the National Park Service fortunately took enough interest in Timbuktu to transcribe all Timbuktu deeds and other legal documents between 1826 up to the early decades of the 20th century. And so I had to read this myself. But had I known, there's actually a PDF binder that has a transcription of this and all the others.
Unbelievable. So, Guy, was the Timbuktu land Quaker land that was given to, like, what's the story behind?
Well, it was owned by Quakers, and Quakers chose to sell it to Black people. And it's funny because they sold all of the, I shouldn't say all of the land, but there was an area which is now Timbuktu that was farms owned by Quaker farmers. And 2 farmers cut their farms into pieces and sold them to Black people. And that's how Timbuktu came into existence.
Okay, so that is a different kind of story than what we have in a Black actually incorporated town of Lawnside, where they didn't necessarily give them land next to them. They gave them land down the road, right?
And that is very funny because you then have many circumstances of Black and white people living right next door to each other. Even, and you could see that over time. And so, for example, Timbuktu was only listed as a separate entity in the census in one year, which was 1880. And so when you're going to go through the census records and figure out who lived in Timbuktu and who didn't, you can't simply say because they were white that they didn't live in Timbuktu, or because they were Black they did, because people lived next to each other. And there are cases of a land that was owned by a Quaker sold to a Black person sold back to a white person, which is not a very common phenomenon, I don't think.
And what is the municipality in which Timbuktu is a part of?
West Hampton Township in Burlington County.
So tell us about this. This looks like a reunion picture with
this was
a T-shirt dispute.
Yeah, this is, that's funny you would say that. Timbuktu Day, which is an annual celebration of our community's founding. And these were just my descendants, my ancestors' descendants, John Brewer's descendants who were there that day. That's a sign. So Timbuktu was just the Black neighborhood in West Hampton for many, many, many years. Now it's not a totally Black neighborhood anymore, but it's still a distinct area. But people didn't know it was there. So we decided to put a neighborhood sign on the highway so people would know where Timbuktu was.
Nice.
We chose, this was probably the year that we actually got that sign. And so we just chose to take our family reunion picture around the sign to commemorate our history.
Oh,
so we were really pleased with that.
So nice. Let's see, you have more?
So this is, you're surprising me. So one of the things that's very, I'll say, mind-boggling about the history of Black people in southern New Jersey that was dominated by Quakers was that we don't have to rely, obviously, on records of enslavement to find our ancestors, as some prominent historians have suggested. This was the New Jersey Mirror on February 27th, 1851, and this is the obituary of my third great-grandmother's husband. After John Brewer died, this was the man that she married. The only thing I had to do to find his obituary was put his name in a search engine on the county library website, and there I found his obituary right next to the obituaries of white people. This is 1851. This is another thing that's different about this region. When I talked about people living together, they certainly was not peaches and cream, total respect and total, we all love each other and respect each other, but there were characteristics of this community that are different. And one of them is finding your ancestors' obituary in the newspaper next to the obituaries of white people without a separate colored section.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is that gravestone of my third great-grandfather, Lambert Giles, it says, the sudden demise of the old colored whitewasher Lambert Giles last week put a number of housekeepers on the wing to find someone to fill his engagements. It says he followed a humble calling, but was regarded as about perfect in his art and would be more missed than would be many of our more pretentious citizens, and they was often engaged weeks in advance. This was his 1875 obituary in the mainstream paper, not the Black paper or the paper for people who lived up at Timbuktu. This was the major paper of the region. This was how they described him.
Wow. I'm surprised they didn't say, well, they put this in the newspaper that his funeral was attended by people of both races.
There was another one. There was another obituary that says that.
Oh, okay.
That's funny you say that. This is a map of Timbuktu. It's a map of, I guess we would say this is like an 1840s map of the community with all the parcels labeled and the owners labeled, including the African Union School and the AME Zion Church and Cemetery. The church and cemetery is number 15. The African Union School is number 2. And I don't have a good sense of how much time we have. One thing I want to say about the African Union School was that the deed said that in order to be a member of the board of trustees of the school, you had to be a person of color that lived within 10 miles of the premises.
Oh, wow.
And that was, again, remember, deeds are filed in the county clerk's office. In those days, deeds were handwritten. So somebody wrote that, and somebody took it to the county clerk's office, and somebody had to write it again. and it was
Yes.
all fine and good. They obviously, this was a period of time when Black people were not allowed to learn to read in Southern states, and so the people who founded the school wanted to have total control over how education was conducted, and they were permitted to do that. And that speaks to the level of tolerance or support in the larger community of this self-determined Black community.
What time period was this again, Guy? For this
January 4th, 1834.
1834. Okay. Okay. Oh, I love this. When you showed this at the Omer conference, I just wanted to run up there and hug you.
Thank you. And so this is an 1849 map of Timbuktu. It then again explains that Timbuktu was a recognized place because it was 1849, but Timbuktu got its own place on the map. You can see.
I mean, in big letters too.
Right, absolutely, bigger than other letters around.
Yeah.
The top community, which is off the top of the map, is Mount Holly, which is a mile and a half or so away. But yeah, Timbuktu is a known place and a recognized place, and a place that was worthy of being signified on a map. This is the first time we know that it happened in 1849, but we see it on later maps as well.
That's amazing. I could tell you've been away, Guy. You didn't say Mount Holly. You said Mount Holly.
Right. Well, I didn't grow up there, so.
Oh, okay. All right. I love this map, Guy. Did you get that online?
Yes, Rutgers has a map repository that has many, many maps.
What's this artifact?
This is a moonshine jug that I found digging in the yard when I planted a tree soon after we built the house, and it was intact. I couldn't believe it. And only one little tiny scratch from the shovel. But basically, to make a long story short, I didn't know what it was. But when you think about it, if you ever watched the Beverly Hillbillies, this is what Granny's jugs look like. So I asked one of the neighbors what he knew about this jug, and he told me that my Aunt Rosie and her neighbor Henrietta Mitchell had a still, and this jug was probably theirs. So this is a very important piece of clay that I found in the ground that is very dear to me, because I now have visions of my great Aunt Rosie, who I knew, and her neighbor, and they're still, and the liquid that used to be in that jug. So
I just like for a moment, like I really, that's amazing. One, to live on the ground where your ancestors were, but then to take it to that next level where you are unearthing artifacts.
Absolutely. There's a real joy in that. Just being able to contemplate that you're traversing the same land they traversed is a very gratifying experience.
I got chills, Guy. That's all I'm gonna say. I got chills from that. That is just absolutely amazing. I think you have another document here. Let's see what this one is.
Oh, this was the indenture of mortgage, and unfortunately, my eye itches, so you have to excuse me. But so after my fourth great grandfather died in 1840, he made a will, fortunately, in 1842, so the property was properly transferred in that generation. But his family, his wife and son-in-law and daughter ran out of money. So they took out a mortgage for $155 on October 22nd, 1845. They paid it back in annual installments of a couple of dollars. One entry reads, received of John Giles 2,000 bricks at $12 a thousand to pay the interest on the within bond for 1875 and 1876. So I envisioned this guy riding up to the house to pay the mortgage with the wagon little bricks, but the person who gave the mortgage actually owned a brickyard. And my great-great-grandfather and brothers worked in the brickyard, and so they were permitted to work off their mortgage payment for that year. And it would just, again, it gives you another vision of your ancestors working in the brickyard. And I know where the brickyard was versus where our house is. So it's another vivid story of my history that most people don't have.
Amazing, Guy. Absolutely amazing. Let us go through the steps because I'm going to run out of time, Guy. This stuff is just so amazing. Let's run through the steps for claiming the property of an early Black landowner in Timbuktu. Step 1, obtain the deed. Home sources. This is like home sources on steroids. Mm-hmm. Step 2, research to find heirs. Step 3, serve public notice. Step 4, remove the heir's property claims. Step 5, legalize ownership. And step 6 is to tell the story. Guy has lots of articles that are in the Augs Journal that you can check out, as well as New Jersey Studies. His Just search for Timbuktu Historical Society and you will find Guy. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. If I could just get this thing to move. Is it going to move? Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Let's see. Where's Guy? Can we come back?
Yes.
There we go. Let me bring Jim back. He hung on there. We're 1 minute over. Everyone, thank you so much for being here. Have a great night. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you so